Let's start. Perfect. So welcome everyone. Welcome to today's demo day / expert panel. Today the topic is how to unlock the potential of AI through public-private partnerships. And our events at Omdena are always mixed case studies, so very practical. So we will share actual projects and then we combine it with a panel at the end where we talk about some of the case studies, the concepts and questions that you might have. So feel free throughout the entire event to share the questions in the chat below. So you can just share them, and then after the presentations, after the first half of the event, we will address them. And don't hesitate, just feel free to share any thoughts, any comments that you have. And it's really about talking with each other, learning from each other, and making it a conversation. And today we have three very interesting panelists. So we have Brian Gerhart, who's calling in from Washington, from the US State Department. And we have Kathleen Buckingham, who is a senior manager from the World Resources Institute. And then we have Arnon Yuri-Yathin, who is the CEO of Malaria, which is an impact startup using artificial intelligence to fight malaria, to eliminate malaria. And in terms of the presentation, the agenda, we will start with a brief introduction into Omdena, where I will tell a little bit about what we are doing in terms of collaboration and how we think that collaboration is the most important and the best way of building AI solutions. And then we will go into the presentations of the panelists who will share a few case studies. And then in the second half, we will do the panel discussion and the Q&A session. And it should not take longer than 60 minutes. And to give you the stage of what we're going to do today, we will talk about how to scale AI's use for higher purposes. And we will basically touch on three aspects. We will talk about data collaboratives. So we will talk about how to partner up in terms of data, how to get the data, how to work with the data, and really try to understand how to leverage data in the most impactful and also most meaningful way. And then we will talk about smart funding or also impact investing. So how can we allocate resources in a way that it creates the biggest impact? And lastly, we will talk about capability alliances, or in other words, how can we bring different parties together with different backgrounds and different skill sets and ways of thinking in order to build solutions. Now, quickly about Omdena. I'm Michael. I'm a founding member of Omdena, and I'm the head of marketing. And at Omdena, what we are a collaborative platform which makes end-to-end AI development accessible. And we very strongly believe in collaboration, and we bring different people together who work on a meaningful problem. So they connect with a problem that they want to solve, and our platforms enables them to collaborate. Organizations come to us, they share the problem, and we bring in the people, the processes, and the technologies to build real-world AI solutions. And we have been doing that so far with around 1,500 engineers coming from 85 countries. And we have a very diverse community. And that's also why we are doing these events, because we believe in sharing perspectives. We believe in learning from each other. And that's really where the beauty comes from in projects that we are doing with many parties from around the world, through collaboration and through sharing and through learning from each other and also inspiring each other. And now I want to hand it over to our first panelist, which is Kathleen Buckingham from the World Resources Institute. And she will present a case. She will also start talking about the World Resources Institute. And then while she's presenting, you can already write down your questions. So if you have questions about what Kathleen is going to talk about, write it down in the chat and we will address it later. So Kathleen, stage is yours. I hand it over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Michael. I'm Kathleen Buckingham. I work for the World Resources Institute based in Washington, D.C. WRI, an environmental think tank. So I'm based in the forestry department. And as you can imagine, as somebody in a forestry department, we are very much focused on biophysical data. So we look at maps, we're very interested in tree cover gain, tree cover loss. But one thing that is more tricky are the people that are in those environments. And that's where machine learning and AI really takes on a transformative way of approaching data. We can really think beyond tree cover data and look at the social landscape. So I want to share with you a few cases that we've worked with through Omdena to think about the social landscape. Okay, so first case, one of the challenges we have with forestry is thinking about land. So how do we engage with land? How do we understand land rights, conflict, and ownership? So this was the first challenge that we engaged with Ondana. What we wanted to do was identify land conflicts in India. And how we did that, we looked at the global database of events, language, and tone, which is GDELT. GDELT looks at media across the world to scrape from sources such as BBC, Le Monde, all the global data sources on news media to look for conflicts. So what we did with Omdena was created a prototype for this, looking at land conflicts. And we received funding due to the prototype. So something like this is very experimental. So I haven't really got time to discuss the ins and outs of this. What we were trying to look for was certain categories of land conflicts. At the World Resources Institute, we're particularly interested in conflicts to do with agriculture or land or forestry. So the code that was created by Omdena looked at a range of different conflict scenarios. Now, what we're doing now is taking that code, we're modifying that code, we're thinking about how do we ground truth this data. But in the first instance, it would be really difficult for us to have created this model ourselves to go and pitch to funders. So having the model in itself enabled us to go to a foundation and say, look, we have this prototype. This is something that is tangible. We can develop this further and look at what is possible for understanding land conflicts in the environment. A second example is we're dealing with land and we're dealing with data poor regions. So a challenge that we have is understanding people within the landscape. Yes, we want to look at where trees are growing and where they're being deforested, but we also want to understand the impact on people. So this is another example of a challenge with Omdena that is just being completed. The aim was to look at economic well-being using machine learning in data poor regions. So just in a nutshell, what the team were doing was to experiment with open source imagery, to create a model based on a methodology that was developed by Stanford University, and to look at census data in India and to look at open source satellite imagery. So what you're seeing here is on one side, on the left, you can see Uttar Pradesh, the overall development in 2011. This is a model that was developed with the census data itself. And on the right side, what you can see is, maybe I can take myself out of this. what you can see here is the predicted model. So what we want to do now is to think of how can we go further with this. This enabled experimentation. It enabled experimentation with open source data. Now we can look at higher resolution imagery. We can go to funders with something tangible. If we're asking funders as an environmental NGO, if we're asking them to envision something that isn't tangible, it's very unlikely to be able to get funds. But with something like this, we can say, this is the accuracy that we gained using open source data. So in this case, the team were able to get 69% data accuracy. What could we do if we develop this beyond the 8-week boundaries? So knowing that Omdena work within these timeframes of 8 weeks, what could be possible beyond the boundaries of the project? And a third example, this is a little bit crazy, but just to give you an example of the increased capacity that we have. Again, we're an environmental NGO that don't have a lot of access to teams of data scientists without organizations such as Omdena. One of the challenges that we have, again, with social data, thinking of social data, is that we want to understand the incentives for forest and landscape restoration. So simply, why would people plant trees? And we want to look in regulations to understand that. But the challenge is there's such a high volume of data. There's such a high volume of data across ministries, and it's really difficult to understand incentives. So the challenge that we're working on, and this is in progress with Omdena, is to identify economic incentives for forest and landscape restoration in Latin America. And this is an example of the workflow. So we have a team that has 10 tasks. So what they're enabling us to do is increase capacity, create a natural language processing workflow, and again, create a prototype that we'll be able to put in front of decision makers and policy makers to show what is possible and to hope to increase funding towards this model. So I don't want to take too much time. I know we're moving into the panel discussion after discussions with the other panelists. What I wanted to share is some of the key things that we have gained through working with Omdena. These prototypes are not the end of the process. They really are the start of the process. It enables us to experiment and learn. As an environmental NGO, we have certain funding requirements, we have restricted funds, and often we have to say what we're going to achieve. Now, with Omdena, iteration is part of that process. It's really important in data science, AI, and machine learning to iterate. So these kind of processes allow us to do that. With social data, it's really challenging. We're constantly up against the biophysical folks who have very strong data visualizations, have maps. But with these new technical approaches, we can really harness the power of data visualization and hope to quantify previously unquantifiable data. So with these prototypes, we can inspire funders because, as I said, you know, without something tangible, it's really difficult to inspire funders to take a leap of faith. Seeing really is believing. And our aim with these prototypes is to go to scale. So having such teams to enable the creation of prototypes allows for recommendations for scaling. So we're hoping that such models will help us institutionalize computational social science, because the environmental field is quite behind with social science methodologies regarding machine learning and AI. Very advanced in terms of looking at GIS and satellite imagery, not so much on the social side. The scaling models will provide us with that evidence and enable us to advocate for change. So the aim is to influence decision makers with these models. And with that, I'll leave it there.
Thanks a lot, Kathleen. We actually got one question which I want to address right now because it just fits the context. And then we move on to the next panelist. The question comes from John, and he's asking, what is the basis for believing that NLP AI will identify economic incentives for planting trees? In the commercial sector, NLP AI for uncovering motivation is pretty poor, doesn't work.
Okay, so what we're doing with the well-being data is we're trying to create a model for a baseline of economic data that will be layered on top of the biophysical data. So take the tree cover gain and tree cover loss as a completely separate issue and a completely separate baseline. There is a lot of research out there, particularly created by Stanford University and others, that have created proxies for well-being using satellite imagery. I know that the World Bank is also developing experiments in this as well. So we wanted to explore the potential of this, considering that we want to get to scale. We're thinking of how do we create a baseline layer. So it really is, at this point in time, it's experimental methodology. We would love to get feedback and collaborate and discuss with others. With the model that we have at the moment, like I said, it's only about 69% accurate. So I think we would need to look at higher resolution imagery to make a more accurate model. But these experimentations are key before we invest a lot of money. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and it's low investment. But we need to have the opportunity to experiment, and in environmental NGOs we have very limited ability to do that. But I would love to chat offline.
Thanks a lot, Kathleen. Thanks for giving the introduction into your work and also the NGO world. And now we will change worlds and we will go into the impact startup world. And I'll hand it over to Anon, who will present now.
Hello. Hi. Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you, see you. Perfect, Anon.
Amazing. So my name is Arnon Khouri-Affin, and I'm the CEO of ZAP, and I'm happy to be here today. My speech contains 3 parts. The first is about our project with Omdena. The second
you haven't
is about
shared your screen yet, Arnon.
I didn't.
Okay.
The second is about our vision and technology, and the last is about our collaboration with the government of Zanzibar. There is a phrase in Hebrew saying that one should begin one's speech by praising the host. In this case, that isn't difficult. We recently completed a project with Ondana, and it was a great experience involving great people. Some of them are here, I see, that gave great results. So even before introducing ZAP, I would like to describe our project with Ondana. And now please let me share my screen. So in malarious countries, every stagnant water body is a potential harbor for killers. That is where the Anopheles mosquito, who transmit malaria, breed. So treating the water bodies is crucial for getting rid of malaria. Nowadays, countries that seek to treat water bodies must scan huge areas by leg. So we reached out, and actually Omdena reached out, and asked Omdena if they can help us prioritize the areas that should be scanned. So, and Omdena smartly broke down the question into 3 different tasks. So they asked, can we detect water bodies from free satellite imagery? The Omdena team developed a machine learning that does so, that detects water bodies from satellite imagery, but it works only if the water body is big enough to be seen in satellite imagery. So it's around 20 meters or more. And for smaller water bodies, they use topography maps and satellite imagery to build a probability map marking the areas in which water bodies have a better chance to accumulate. Because you can use topography, and in the lower areas, the water bodies have better chance to exist. And the last thing is that for future understanding of correlates, they also extracted a lot of other data, such as land use, population density, roads, etc., in order to understand the probabilities of water bodies. So this is an example for water body. So this is water body is very, very dangerous because it can mosquitoes can breed in it. And this is one of the approaches taken by Omdena of directly detection of water bodies. This is about extracting a lot of information. And Ondana just did a great job with a lot of thinking about priorities, which research could be done today, which research should be kept for the future when ZAP will collect more data. So a lot of strategy thinking in the Ondana. So I want to thank them, the volunteers and the organization for the great support and for having me here today. So this is about Ondana. Now regarding ZAP malaria. We founded ZAP to take part in the fight against malaria, a disease that kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, particularly toddlers and pregnant women. You can see the map of malaria across the world. We believe that malaria is one of the world's biggest solvable problem. So biggest solvable problem. It is one of the biggest because it takes more than 400,000 lives a year, and because of its huge economic cost. Imagine like today we understand the cost of COVID-19, so imagine the cost of malaria so many years. However, as opposed to many other big problems, malaria is solvable because it can be totally eliminated. Many countries, including here in Israel, have already eliminated this horrible disease. So how do you eliminate it? So a proven method to do so is called larviciding. This is larviciding, like you can see that you just spray the water body with environmental friendly material. You can even drink the water, and the mosquito cannot breathe in it. So, but must treat every stagnant water body in a given geographic area. For simplicity, imagine an isolated island in which all of the stagnant water bodies have been treated. The mosquitoes will not be able to breed, and eventually the mosquito population will drop and the disease cycle will be cut. So we have a proven method, but of course in reality it is not so simple to implement. There are hundreds of villages on the island or in any African district. And in each of them, the water bodies can be anywhere around the houses or in the surrounding fields or above the hill. The government may send workers to spray the water bodies, but if those operations are undermanaged, and by undermanaged, I mean literally manages with pen and paper and forms, they will be very ineffective. Many water bodies will be overlooked, and workers may even miss entire villages. So this is reality. This is reality that I have seen in my eyes. Like it's very difficult to manage larviciding operations. It's very difficult to find the water bodies. This is why many governments in Africa prefer bed nets over larviciding. They know that bed nets will not solve the problem, but perceive larviciding as operationally impossible. And they're right. It's almost impossible. And our mission is to solve this operational problem once and for all. We use machine learning to plan, implement, and monitor large-scale, cost-effective operations. So exactly like the machine learning things that Omdena did with us and other machine learning tool, just to prioritize where I want to find the water bodies, not everywhere, because it will be too expensive in terms of the budget available for those operations. So just imagine that for African countries, even like, let's say, $10 per person protected in malaria, it's too expensive. So you must do it very, very cheap. We also have an online dashboard. Maybe I can show it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see the dashboard? So I can really see the water bodies detected by field workers. So you see the water bodies, for example, and this is actual images from just the last month. You can also see the exact route where they, because we help them to be very thorough to find a water body. We tell them where they visited and where not, so that we can visit every point, and they do it with a mobile app. So the online dashboard manage the operation and ensure that every village is assigned to a specific person, and every task is being carried out properly. If you want, it's like a Trello for treatment of water body. Finally, the system is connected to a mobile application. Each field worker have a mobile device that we developed, which directs the field workers toward the task and ensure thoroughness. The app alerts the field worker if they miss even one water body or if they forgot to scan even a small area. So to summarize, our system using artificial intelligence, improve coordination, and use a mobile application to ensure 100% coverage of water bodies. Our technology has been successfully tested in the field and has been recognized by prestigious international competitions such as X Prize. We are one of the finalists, and Falling Walls. More important, our system is already being used in a few countries. For example, we're in the midst of a big campaign in Wasi, Ghana, and using our system field workers more than doubled the amount of water bodies they located and treated compared to previous campaign in the same area. This hugely improves the protection for more than hundreds of thousands residents of the area. This is something that's really happening. What we do is to optimize operation. Our goal is to make them successful enough to eliminate the disease. We are optimistic because it has been done before. Countries have already eliminated malaria with larviciding when they did it thoroughly enough. And now, for the last part, please let me describe our work in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is a semi-autonomous region of Tanzania. They have their own ministry of, we'll do it in a view format so you can see it better. They have their own ministry of health. It's very beautiful. I don't know if someone visited in Zanzibar. It's an amazing place. They have their own ministry of health within which operates a malaria control program that is one of the most successful in the continent. They tenfold, like the malaria in Zanzibar is 10th of the malaria in, for example, Kenya. ZAP is part of the consortium that wishes to introduce drones to malaria activities. The drones will map periodically the area and locate the water bodies. The ZAP application will assign the water bodies to volunteers from the communities who will spray them with environmentally friendly insecticide. The collaboration is led by a researcher from the UK, Andy Hardy. The project received a prestigious grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which care a lot about malaria, through the IVCC organization. Working with the government, and this is maybe a part of the panel, has a lot of advantages. The most important is that a successful campaign can lead to a long-run relationship. The Ministry of Health owns elaborate data set of malaria cases, mosquito prevalence, and other factors, and they are very knowledgeable about the local mosquito species and how to engage the community, which is very important because we want to work with volunteers. They are also helpful in predicting a lot of challenges which we as foreigners are not familiar with. It is worth noting that the challenges in working with the governments. Young startups are about agile work, about doing everything fast, which is not exactly the comfort zone of government, any government, which I know. Actually, I started my career in government in the Israeli security authorities, which regulate the stock market, and everything is very slow. And for many B2G startups, startups that sell to governments, this is one of the challenges to overcome, and we are no exception. We think that understanding how to work with governments is one of the most important enablers for our success. Our system is not a plug and play. It involves people from several contexts and several working and managing levels, from field workers, so we have and managers. So we have a lot to learn, and I'm looking forward to learning some more this evening, and we'll gladly share during the evening. For me, it's evening. The few things we have already learned. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arnon. That was very insightful, very, very interesting. I mean, you are doing great work, and you said some interesting things also. So you said working with the government, and there are some challenges and also opportunities. So I would say it's the right time to hand it over to Brian to Washington, D.C., who will talk a little bit about how the government works and present your work. Yeah. So Brian, over to you.
Yeah, Arnon, you mentioned that moving quickly is not the specialty of any government. And I am here to say that's absolutely accurate. And it's why an office like ours exists. So my name is Brian Gerhart. I'm a senior program officer in the Office of Global Partnerships at the Department of State. I've been with this office for about 4 years. And prior to that was advising on communications for the Grand Challenges for Development project at USAID, which was a kind of portfolio of competitions to support projects that could address specific needs in the Office of Science and Technology. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I will ask that famous question: Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So yes, as mentioned, we are the Office of Global Partnerships at the U.S. Department of State, and our goal is to work with the private sector. And we speak of the private sector really broadly. This includes the academic sector, the nonprofit sector, faith-based groups, anything essentially that's not the government. And we want to work with them to advance our foreign policy. This is a chart that we point to a lot, and the takeaway from it is that U.S. official development assistance has been going up over the years relative to what we have spent in past generations, and yet the percentage of financial flows that are going abroad in total are diminishing on the State Department, or the official development flows are diminishing in comparison to private philanthropy, remittances, private capital flows. I mean, you can see here, this is from 2013 and 2014. We're currently working with the Hudson Institute to get more up-to-date data, but I can assure you that our percentage is probably still going down, and the percentages of groups from the private sector are still going up. And so we have, a mandate from the State Department that's based on this idea that's, I think, articulated really well in the State and USAID Joint Strategic Plan, which is that we simply cannot accomplish what we're hoping to do. We cannot be effective in our work in diplomacy and development without strategic partnerships. And I know at this point, this seems like a really obvious, obviously the government alone is not going to be able to solve all of these problems. But there was a time where this was a new and novel concept. And so I take you back to 2006, when it was determined that the State Department really should jump on the bandwagon, latch onto that buzz phrase of public-private partnerships, or P3s, or whatever was in vogue at the time, and really establish a home for public-private partnerships at the Department of State. And so, we have two main goals, essentially, which is expanding private sector collaboration to address the Secretary's top policy priorities and to better institutionalize the department's private sector collaboration. So again, I point to Arnon's quote, which I love, of just, it's not the specialty of any government to move quickly, because I think when we were initially beginning to be utilized by the department, the idea was, hey, look, let's harness the agility, let's harness the innovation, let's harness the resources of the private sector in our work, rather than trying to be the ones who set everything up, go through, because as we all know, the world is moving way quicker than we can address it, whether this is technology or the problems, the challenges we're facing. And so the United States government is slowly, it's like a crew trying to turn around a cruise ship to do this kind of culture shift. But we're slowly trying to come to terms with the fact that, like, our value can really be to harness the power of everything else in this country that we can utilize on a global scale. And there's another quote that I like from when I was at USAID in the Office of Science and Technology there. And the leader at the time had come back from a trip to Silicon Valley, and he said, "I've seen the future and we're not in it." And it was kind of a dramatic but very impactful quote that I think emphasized that, like, we really need to find our place in this broader ecosystem as folks who can support effective projects that are addressing the priorities that we have, and working in collaboration with folks who can do the things that we simply can't. And so, again, I'm just going to speak briefly about, what our office actually does, as kind of developed on this screen right here. I always joke that, even within the State Department, if you ask, 3 different people what our office does, you'll get 3 completely different answers. Because one of the things we do is develop partnerships. We oversee a number of multi-stakeholder public-private partnerships that range in focus and geographic region. Our boss, Tomas de Boss, always says that we're a flag-gnostic office. We don't focus on one area. We are equal opportunists in trying to, more effectively address priorities of the Secretary of State. And so we oversee a number of partnerships. In my portfolio specifically, I oversee a partnership with 40 United States universities called Diplomacy Lab, where we're utilizing the intellectual reservoir that exists in the United States to get research for the Department of State. I also oversee a partnership with the UN Foundation's Girl Up initiative, and a few private sector partners like Google and Intel, called YSci, which is a STEAM camp, so STEM plus arts and design, STEAM camp for high school girls in the United States and abroad. And in the past, we've done everything from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. We've run hackathons based on sustainable fishing. So we're really all over the place in terms of the partnerships that we oversee directly. But another thing we do is vetting and due diligence for the entire Department of State. So anytime that somebody wants to work with the department, or the department identifies, hey, this is something that we should be latching onto and working with, it's our office that does the due diligence to say, yes, this is the right partner to work with, and does our best to uncover anything that will potentially be problematic down the road, or potential benefits down the road. So we do vetting and due diligence. We do capacity building, and that's something that we focused on a lot lately, is realizing that the idea of us being kind of the sole gatekeepers of partnerships at the Department of State is completely ridiculous. We're a really small shop. The State Department has 75,000 global employees. And the way to make this culture shift happen that I was talking about with the cruise ship is to empower other State Department employees and officers to understand that public-private partnerships are not just this kind of novel kumbaya tool, but something that need to be utilized in every project that we're doing. So we're trying to build capacity through consultations, trainings, things like that. And then, another thing we do is try to bring private sector best practices to the Department of State. We are constantly learning from the folks that we work with, what we should be utilizing in our own work. So, we talk about co-creation is something that Omdena does, and that's something that we've recently incorporated at the Department of State. Is rather than saying, "Hey, we've got this money, let's throw it at a contractor who can do the same thing that they've always done." It's also a recognition that sometimes we don't even know the best way to approach solving the problem. And it's saying, let's bring the experts into a room together, folks who would be working on this, folks who normally are competitors, and say, let's all come together and figure out what we're trying to do and see if there's overlaps in the work that you are already doing, and form a consortium that we can then fund to more effectively address certain high priority issues. So we do everything from co-creation to our own version of an accelerator. We have what we call the Bold Line Public-Private Partnership Accelerator, which is taking priority issues within the department and saying, hey, how can we help folks in the private sector establish partnerships that are going to be able to address these needs. So I don't want to take too much time out of our opportunity to discuss, but again, here's a few other things that are in our portfolio that we've done. I mentioned a few of them already. The key is, we are not the subject matter experts. I am not an AI specialist. I'm the one who, when people say, like, explain it to me like you're explaining it to your grandmother, I'm the grandmother there. But what I can do is I can find the folks who are the subject matter experts and make sure that we can draw those lines to connect the dots, with, the many programs and offices at State Department that are full of information that can be used valuably to work with your, individual organizations. But we're the connectors, we're the facilitators for that. So think of us, think of the Office of Global Partnerships, think of me in particular now, I'm your face, as your window into this giant kind of impenetrable building. If you've ever spent any time in DC, you've seen all of the beautiful brutalist architecture that is this impenetrable concrete. Think of us as a little window and some glass into the State Department. So I'll be sure to put our website in the chat and include my email address as well. So if you ever need anything from us, trying to find somebody at State to work with, I'm your guy. So I will leave it there and figure out how to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
You managed. Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we have 15 minutes left for the panel. So I want to make it focused at the audience. So if you have questions now, any kind of questions, now is the time to ask these questions. And then, we can answer some of your questions. In the meantime, Ryan, you said something about building a window into the government and an interface. So I think for many people, it's difficult to see that window. It's not that obvious. So my question actually to Arnon is, how did you manage to work with the government? What was the process behind it? You're working with governments in Africa, and I would be curious, how did you do that? How did you build the relationship? And I think that would be some interesting process to understand better.
So that's a good question, and actually good questions. So the first question is, how do I reach out? And for that, the world of malaria is very well organized into conferences, and people know people. So the reaching out is actually the easy part. The second part, which I think is the most difficult one, is they deal with problem, and we believe that it's worth trying to solve the problem. We don't know for sure that we can solve the problem, but we know that we have a method that worked in the past, and we optimized it through tools available in the 21st century. And it's difficult to tell someone that does one thing to do something else. And as Brian put it, it's like a very big boat that need to. And then the last part, which is, I think the best advice I ever got about working in Africa, but maybe it's true not only for Africa. You always should find in every organization which you work with, you should find the person that sees the diamonds that you see. Because entrepreneurs and startups, they see diamonds. They believe, each of us believe in, so for example, I believe that doing better larviciding could lead to very good results. Not everyone see it. If it was so trivial, so Google will take my project and do it alone. So, but I see it, and for example, Google don't see it. So I see it, and I need partners that see it. And it's not partner, it's not the whole government. It could be one person. And this one person should be not too high in the hierarchy and not too low. It should be somewhere in the middle. And then in government, one of the things that we found that we should find this person, and you should be a bit impolite to find this person, because the government tell you work with this person, and the person is great, is smart, and is dedicated, but he cannot see the diamonds that you see, and you want to work with this one. And you should meet people around the person, your contact person, and do it. This is kind of sharing from our experience.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Arnon. So, Brian, how can the government ensure to become better at seeing the diamonds? What do you think?
Boy, that's a good question. I was actually just going to kind of echo Arnon's effect. We do the same thing when we're going out to the private sector, is trying to, one thing that people think about when they think of partnerships with the government is that we are an ATM machine, and it's just kind of like, I'm going to go to them with this project. They're going to love it. They're going to throw money at me, and, we'll be on our way. Speaking for our office in particular, that's not how we work. We don't have money to give you. We are here to try and collaborate on building things together that are of mutual benefit. But in terms of seeing the diamond, one of the things that we've been doing a lot lately are called partnership opportunity delegations. And it's essentially identifying a priority country and something that we work with their governments to find out, like, what is it that you're trying to do right now? And how can we help? And we try to bring folks from the American private sector, academic sector, et cetera, to the country to meet with the government officials, to meet with private sector folks on the ground in that country, to explore opportunities for collaboration. And the key is, when we're going to the private sector, we're looking for the folks who see the potential as well. And so even hearing Arnon say, like, you don't want somebody too high, you don't want somebody too low, like, that is exactly right. It's about finding that person who has decision-making influence, but is willing to get in the weeds, explore with you, and try to understand how powerful a potential opportunity can be. And so we spend a lot of time in our office. We've got, contacts all over, the big tech companies that everybody wants to work with and things like that. But the hard part is digging around to find the folks who are really excited about, and I love that phrase, and I'm going to steal that, Arnon, about seeing the diamond. I'm going to use that all the time. I'll try to give you credit, but eventually it's just going to become my own quote. It's what the government does best, right? We find the private sector idea and we run with it. But to your original question, Michael, we're trying to shift that culture in the State Department about not, innovation requires the ability to fail, and the government cannot fail. It's like the great inherent disconnect of the idea of the government being innovative is we can't fail, and yet we want to be more risky. We want to, because without risk, there's no reward. And so we're trying to impact a culture shift at the department and across the interagency to kind of safely fail, to kind of safely be risky, and to better understand that, like, there are ways that we can work with the private sector and enable them to be the ones who are trying the new things, and work with them. Let them be the kind of pioneers and the explorers. And so again, I think it's going to take a while before this is the common kind of feeling of seeing the diamond. But I think that the more collaboration with the private sector we have, the more opportunities we have to kind of glean that spirit.
Thank you. I see we have 6-7 more minutes left, so I think we can address 2 to 3 more questions. And we have one from Tim. It's to Brian. Does State have any interesting examples of public-private AI partnership projects? And then a follow-up question is, what State's overall knowledge and appreciation for AI, ML, and data analytics?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, right now, so inside of the same bureau that our office is in, which is, we're under the Undersecretary for Economics, Energy, and the Environment. We have STAS, which is the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary. And this is the office at State that really is focused on cutting edge technology and innovation. And right now, the priorities of the State Department in, you know, working on in AI are trying to establish frameworks for, you know, imparting American values into machine learning and artificial intelligence, and making sure that as AI becomes more commonplace, the United States and its partners abroad are kind of adhering to sets of principles that make this something that we can utilize in a way that, you know, works positively for everybody involved. So right now, you know, I'm happy to connect you with some folks in STAS who could probably tell you more specifically about projects they're working on that are utilizing AI and data science. But I was speaking to my colleague in that office the other day about this, knowing this was coming up. And it seems like, you know, in the government right now, the leaders in the AI space are the Department of Energy. Seems to be the agency that's really trying to run with AI and be the kind of thought leader inside of the government. So I would encourage you to check out the Department of Energy's projects, because, you know, at the State Department, you know, we've got all these embassies globally that are proxies for, you know, the American government. And so just because an embassy is part of the State Department doesn't mean it's cut off from the Department of Energy, Departments of Education, et cetera. And so, you know, our embassy colleagues are the ones who are kind of carrying out some of those more specific projects abroad. But again, if you want to shoot me an email, Tim, I put my email earlier in the chat, and I'd be happy to connect you with some folks at State who can tell you more about what they're doing individually with AI.
Thanks, Brian. So I would go a little bit more operational right now, because we talked briefly about the role of data and also the challenges of data. And so I would like to ask Arnon, how did you come up with the, you know, idea of focusing on the problem that you are solving, and how did you overcome, you know, data challenges? Was it something for you that was very obvious from the start, or what was the process behind this?
So if you asked about malaria, so malaria is, as I said, it's one of the biggest solvable problem in the world, and it's amazing that such big problem could be solved. And this is along with things that just happened, me visiting in a hospital in India and see people with malaria. So this is just a story. If you ask about the data, how we manage with data, so it's really difficult. And we don't have much data. The people here that participated in our Omdena project, they know that we didn't give them enough data. And this is also an interesting point when working with government, because we tell, for example, the government of Kenya, work with us and you will get better malaria and we will get more data. So it's a bit, you must be transparent. You must say that you want the data. And sometimes this is not so, they are not happy about that. You want to take our data. Why you want to take our data? And then you explain them, it will help our product, but it also improve your project. So this is a sensitive point. But this is what we have. This is one of the challenges that we deal with.
Okay. Well, let's hand it over to Kathleen. Kathleen, how are you dealing with you know, data challenges? You mentioned that experimentation is quite important, and that's what you're doing right now, and you're using publicly available data. What is your perspective on data and you know, getting access to data? Do you have any strategies on this?
It really depends. I guess one thing that really resonated with me was what Brian was saying, the ability to fail. I think in our space, we don't really have much of an ability to fail. So we're having to think about data from that perspective. But if we could open up the possibility to fail, then we can be more experimental with data. And there was a lot of chat on the Zoom group chat about NLP and whether it'll work, because text can be data, and to what extent can we turn text into data? It's not just about finding data, it's about generating data. And with social science, we're having to be more creative about what can be data. And I think John was mentioning in the chat, it depends if you have fixed data sets or not. And that's something that we're exploring. For example, with our natural language processing algorithm for policy, we're bounding that in, we're looking at policy documents anyway. We're looking only at policy documents. So we're really having to, in the social space, think about what can be data, what can we use machine learning, AI, to how can we use it to generate data? And I think in that space, it will involve a lot of failure, because some of it will lead to nothing, some of it will lead to something, and that's where we need to be able to prototype. That's where we need to be able to experiment and swiftly prototype, and that's where I think Ondana comes in with these 8 weeks challenges.
Thank you, Kathleen. Time flies, as we already have 1 minute after the official end of this webinar, and I'm very grateful for you sharing your insights. And what we will do is we will link to the project that you have been sharing, and we will share some of the work that you have been doing, so that everyone who's listening right now, if you're curious and you want to read up on some details, you will have the opportunity. So we will share that in a couple of days. And I can just say thank you. And that was very insightful. And I think the overall narrative is we need to try more, we need to do more, and we need to be willing to fail in order to learn. Yeah, that was very helpful. So thank you. Thanks to Arnon, thanks to Kathleen, thanks Brian, thanks everyone listening in. And we will end the webinar now, and hope to see you in one of our future sessions. We always do these kind of demo days and panelists, and we always mix practical results with some talk and some theory. And I hope you enjoyed it. So thanks everyone for joining.